And even capitalists understand this. That's why very few of them defend pure capitalism. They defend some form of mixed capitalism. You'll hear capitalists all the time that'll bitch about things like, well, we need to regulate social media companies. We need to do this and that. That's their understanding that pure unfettered capitalism will inevitably lead to the voice of the regular person in the working class being trampled upon.
Yeah, I'm going to give you maximum time here to respond. I want you to take this fucking Tanky out.
I'm super fucking confused.
I'm assuming that this is probably going to be a lot of fun. Do you guys have any questions about the rules?
So we are taking, when we're the pro position, we adapt that position regardless of what we really believe.
Regardless of what you believe, you're going to argue
how long
from the
this
pro
lasts.
position. Okay, for Rob Noor, pro position, communism was great and Karl Marx was a hero.
So it's easy to shit on communism because we haven't seen its lofty goals be reached. But the reality is Marx had an excellent point that we see the exploitation of people with the working class that occurs in country after country throughout the world. Although capitalism may have been a preferable system to like monarchical systems and things like that, the reality is it still sees the inexorable end of capital being sucked from the working class to an elite wealthy class. And even capitalists understand this. That's why very few of them defend pure capitalism. They defend some form of mixed capitalism. You'll hear capitalists all the time that'll bitch about things like, well, we need to regulate social media companies. We need to do this and that. That's their understanding that pure unfettered capitalism will inevitably lead to the voice of the regular person in the working class being trampled upon. Now, the reality is the failures that we've seen of countries that tried to achieve communism wasn't the failures of Marx or communism. It was the failures of humans that were in charge of that had flawed systems themselves, flawed behaviors themselves. But as we move on, yes, it is true that capitalism could have led us to a better place than we were before it, but we need to inevitably move on to a more of a communist system where we give the bare minimum of people, we give things that people need for the minimum survival to people and make sure that people aren't hoarding private property and things like that. As we transition to more of that system, we'll see that as resources and the population explodes and resources dwindle more and more, and we have more things like AI and automatics, or robotics and things like that, we'll start to see that communism comes into place, and it's actually going to be more of the paradise that Marx imagined than the failures we saw with China and the Soviet Union.
Fucking Tanky Rob, man. He's laying the Haas down.
You actually
he is laying the Haas down, boy.
Quick statement. You have made a better case for communism than like 90% of the Tankies that come through to argue with me. Holy fucking shit, dude.
Hang on. Before we get to your response, Sanzo, before Big Commie Rob, right? Before we get to Big Commie Rob, all the super chats tonight, make sure you be generous with them, everybody, because they're all going to go to Sanzo to help him pay his fucking rent. Dumb hippie.
Jesus Christ.
This, for $10 from CW, says, Rob, who is your favorite pirate? Does your dad still talk about Bond's candy arm not throwing out Sid Bream from Shallow Left in the 92 NLCS? Assuming Spanky Law, I don't know who that is.
Valiant.
To the former question.
Yeah. My dad, the Sid Bream thing, I still remember that. I used to go to the baseball games with my grandma because she thought that
hole.
Listen,
so how about that, Sanzo? What's more important, eating or paying your rent? Make a choice. Big Commie Rob's in the house, right? He's here advocating that you not get thrown out of your home and that the state subsidize you, Sanzo. That's what he's doing, buddy.
So my argument against Rob is the same argument that I have against socialists and communists now. When we look at these statements about like we need full communism, everything should be owned by the workers. The workers, they put in their labor. The labor is what makes the things that they create have value. All of these things ultimately fall down under the smallest amount of scrutiny. When you put labor into an object, that doesn't in and of itself give that thing more value. For instance, we can look at something that sold for, $50,000 in 1950, a 1950s Corvette, and we can see that it sells for $300,000 or more nowadays. Why? Because we put more value on that thing. There wasn't more labor put into that Corvette, but the value that we place on it is what the value is. We can also look at the problems of communism when it comes to these like grand economic things. When you're centrally planning something, how do you plan how much food every single person gets, how much commodities they consume, et cetera, et cetera. These grand calculation problems just can't be solved by human beings. And unless he's going to make an argument that comes like from like a giant AI that's going to magnanimously distribute equally to everybody the exact same resources, I don't know how he's going to defend communism.
Okay, I let you go a little bit longer than usual. Rob, I'll give you a little bit longer time to respond. Big Papa Kami, Rob's in the house, gonna throw the smackdown on fucking Sanso. Go ahead, Rob.
All right. So Sanso, let's take out the practicality of it for a second. Would you say that the goals of Marx, would you disagree with the following goals? One, that every person deserves a bare minimum of survival, shelter, food, things like that.
Sure.
Would you say that also under current economic systems, we see exploitation of the working class?
I don't think it's inherent to the system, no.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's inherent to the system or not. Do you think that in the status quo, that's what we see?
Not really. Not in the systems that are in the world right now. I would say,
for example,
if we had a more unfettered capitalism kind of thing, then absolutely. But to say that like we need to go full whole hog into socialism or worker ownership,
we're not talking about the practicality of it. So, for example, we'd see a company like Amazon, where Jeff Bezos is making more money in one day than most of us will make in our lifetime. Do you think it's fair that we hear reports of people that work in Amazon factories that can't even get urine breaks, that are making peanuts that have to be subsidized by government money anyways in order to provide for their families?
I wouldn't say that that's exploitation. They can always go and get themselves another job, whereas Jeff Bezos can't, create a new Amazon off of the top of his head.
But this is the same argument that we hear when people say about like, well, you could always go create another platform. If you get kicked off a platform, you could always go create another. And then when they do, they say, well, actually, we're not going to provide for, we're not going to allow internet providers to link to that and things like that. And so you could always go create.
How does this
let me finish. The problem is you could say that workers could go elsewhere, but the reality is the current economic system is so entrenched that they're unable to go anywhere where they won't be exploited in a manner that we see. Right? You could leave Amazon and go somewhere else, but you're going to end up at another job where you're making. So the point I'm making is just when talking about the goals, clearly we can see that the goals of Marx are knowable. So the question then becomes, is it practical to get to a situation where we eliminate private property?
Okay.
It may be difficult to see that.
Just real quick. What you just said. I would just want to respond to what you just said. Okay. I don't think that getting a paycheck is exploitation. A job is much easier to find a new job. You can replace a job much easier than you can replace an entire business. So when we say that the workers are the ones being exploited, really, they're exploiting the resources that they are being gifted while they're in the workplace by the owner of that business. They are being lended those means of productions so that they can create things that the owner bought all the supplies for. He bought all the machines. He bought all the software for the computers, right? And he's providing training for those people, and he's providing education for them, whether it's to pick up things with a forklift, anything like that. Those sorts of things are usually covered by the business themselves. So for them to say that the workers are exploited is absolutely insane.
The reality is, right? The reality is that there is exploitation because all those things could be that you said can be true, but it still doesn't mean that the value of the work that's being committed by these workers is being paid out commensurate to the actual labor that they're putting in versus what the people that are owning these things put in. And we can see that unfettered capitalism and not even capitalism, we don't say that the system we have today, we can see that it rewards all sorts of corruption and incompetence. And you could say what you want, but this is why we know that the wealth gap has been increasing and the working class is getting screwed over more and more. Even though technically on paper it might look like, hey, minimum wage went up, they're doing better. The reality is they're not doing better vis-a-vis the advances we've had in technology. These advances in technology, you say that it's unfeasible that we could ever have this system would be able to divvy out these things without private ownership and things like that, but that's not true. We have all kinds of things in our economy today that we would have said 50 years ago would have been unfeasible. I'll grant you that it would be unfeasible to say that tomorrow we could start a total communist utopia. But after a series of revolutions that occur culturally without violence, we could see that we would be able to prioritize worker rights and things like that in a way that in a couple decades we could see feasibly having a communist utopia where we would be able to provide for everyone and allow workers to own the actual, through collectivism, to own the actual value of their labor.
But that still doesn't answer any of the questions that oh, Andrew, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm going to give you maximum time here to respond. I want you to take this fucking Tanky out.
Yeah. So like actually none of the things that you just said there responded to anything that I said. You brought up again the thing that I talked about at the beginning, the labor theory of value. Just because you put labor into something doesn't give it value. I could sit all day long and scrape away at a penny to turn it into a ring, scrape out the innards of a penny with a file. And you know what? That would be less than it would be worth less than 1 cent afterwards, even though I spent all this time and labor putting into this new ring I created. But that doesn't make it valuable. What makes something valuable is someone putting value on something. Jackson Pollock walking up to a canvas and just slapping as much paint onto it does not create is not as much labor as like a Da Vinci style painting, where you have to go in and get all the shading right and get the very realistic features on the face. But a Jackson Pollock painting is going to sell for tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars. There's nothing intrinsic to labor that creates value. And in regards to this idea that the economic distribution question can be answered so easily in a couple of decades, we've seen this happen already in the world. We can look in Russia, we can look in China, right? These are countries that have been socialist or communist for decades. All right, Russia eventually collapsed because they were not able to answer this economic distribution problem, right? The economy collapsed, they turned into an oligarchy. China right now has been embracing capitalism because they were not able to actually distribute resources to everyone. They had tens of millions die due to starvation during the Great Leap Forward.
Obscene profit break, guys. Jason W. says labor gives value to the one who bled, Sanzel, sweat, and cried during production. That's what you get. That's what you get, RobHaz.